Thank you, everybody, for attending today. This is the beginner track, and this first session is all about the fundamentals of the knowledge-aware approach. My name is Jim Petrowitz, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Auros Knowledge Systems. I'm your host today, and with me, I have our presenter, Josh Kullis. Josh is the Technical Services Manager for Auros Knowledge Systems, and he's also a knowledge-aware consultant, so he's going to be doing the bulk of the presentation. As with the opening session that hopefully you all saw with Jeff, we want to keep this as interactive as we can. So if you have questions throughout Josh's presentation, please put them in the chat on the right side of your screen, and we'll have some time to address those at the end. Also, at the end of the session, I'm going to put a survey link into the chat. So if you wouldn't mind taking just a quick minute to fill that out, it'll redirect you to SurveyMonkey, and it's just a couple of questions. Our feedback really helps us to improve this conference every single year. And anything you can add or comment on would be extremely helpful. So with that, I will turn it over to Josh. Josh, take the presentation away.
Thank you, Jim. Let me share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
We can see it, yes.
Oh, you probably see presentation mode now, or do you see the presentation?
It's in presentation mode. There it is. Oh, no, it's back to.
Well, that's not what we want. Give me 1 minute. I will share the other monitor. How about now? Can you see the presentation? Not in presentation mode?
Yep,
okay.
Now it's perfect. Thanks.
All right. So appreciate everyone joining the session here today. Like Jim said, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of Auros IQ. So we'll kind of go through a few of our learning points. We'll talk a little bit about a community of practice. Then we'll talk a little bit about assessments. So we heard Jeff talk a little bit about the different features or the concepts behind the knowledge-aware approach. We'll get into features and how they help you accomplish the knowledge-aware technique and facilitate it. We'll talk a little bit about a project, kind of what that does within Auros IQ. Then we'll talk about knowledge packets. And then finally, throughout the entire presentation, we'll talk about something called information hierarchy. So it's kind of how different things are organized and where they sit within this entire concept. So to start off, we have the community of practice. The community of practice is going to be our fundamental organizational unit. So it's very essential in Auros, and there are a lot of different ways that groups configure their communities of practice. But you can kind of think of them as potentially organized around a process. You can think of them organized around organizational structure. So maybe the group that you participate in, it could be product development, engineering, it may be supplier quality, it could be a lot of different things associated with the organization itself. We have other customers or users that organize their communities based on product group. So you may see just different products throughout the organization, and they have their own community. So what we generally recommend when you're first onboarding and kind of starting is to organize around process, and we'll get into some of the reasons why that is. But the community is going to play a key role in the strategy for provisioning, applying, and maintaining the knowledge. So the community of practice allows you to configure the different assets within it that are going to help to facilitate this provisioning of knowledge, applying, maintaining it, and like Jeff kind of talked about, starting to produce that data footprint that we can then continuously learn about. So from an information hierarchy perspective, the community of practice is kind of going to be at the top. We'll get into, as we go through all these different terms, we'll kind of show how they orient to one another. But like I said, the community of practice is the fundamental organizational unit within Auros. So it's really going to drive a lot of the configurations around the management and the application and the provisioning of the knowledge. So if we now talk a little bit about the assessment itself, right beneath the community of practice is the assessment. And the assessment is going to be a comprehensive toolkit that's used to efficiently apply, evaluate, and track collections of knowledge.
Hey, Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Hold on one second. We've got a few folks that are saying they're not seeing or hearing anything. So I think we're having some technical difficulties. If anyone can hear us, see the presentation, could you chime in? Joe Bass says, I can hear and see you. I can hear and see you. Okay, so it's maybe just a few folks that are having the issue. I'll deal with that in the chat. Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go back to what you were doing.
No worries.
Sorry, everyone. I want to make sure it wasn't just wasn't everyone that had the problem. Thanks.
Yep. Let me share again, and I'll start back up here. All right, so we're back on the assessment for the presentation.
Sorry, no, you can pick up right where you were left off. It's just a few folks are having, and we've got instructions on how to fix the problem.
But you can see the assessment presentation, right?
Yes.
Okay. So just to recap again for the assessment control, it's a comprehensive toolkit. It's used to efficiently apply, evaluate, and track collections of knowledge. And for real-life examples of the assessment, you can think of checklists that exist within your organization, potentially design review templates. So you might have a PowerPoint or a Word document or some sort of template. It could also be a checklist to facilitate design reviews. We also have different audits that get accomplished at different organizations. We kind of have three general categories that we use to say they can indicate the use of an assessment may be valuable. That's anywhere that a checklist exists, and that's just simply because it typically means one of the other two things. That there's standard work that exists. There are things that need to be traced or audited over time. So if you have any of those three characteristics, it generally is an indicator that the assessment control can be valuable for you. And like I said, a checklist, maybe a design review template, some sort of audit that's being performed, all of those are examples of assessments. And what the assessment is going to do is it helps us facilitate the assignment of work, the tracking of conformance. So whether we pass or fail certain items within our checklist, or if we have different questions in an audit, have we passed those or we failed those? Is there risk associated with them? The other thing that the assessment can do, which we won't get into a whole lot here, is it facilitates the solving of problems. So we'll talk a little bit about the knowledge packet, how it's going to collect a lot of this data, but the assessment allows us to create issues from a line item, which will then allow you to get subject matter experts involved, help troubleshoot problems. That can all be tracked and also establish a data footprint that we can learn from. And then finally, just the communication of status. So if you have work, it gets assigned out. We're going through and completing the different items within that assignment. Once we're complete or once we're done and maybe it's ready for approval, that can be communicated back to the proper parties through the use of an assessment control. Now, as all of these things are happening, behind the scenes, Auros is establishing a data footprint. So we heard Jeff Moffa in our first session talk about establishing data, collecting that data in a normalized format so that we can start to learn from it through AI techniques. The assessment is going to give us the ability to kind of do that consistently across applications of the knowledge. So the assessment plays a big part in establishing that data footprint. And we can talk a little bit about that as we continue to go through the process. So if we come back to our information hierarchy concept, the community practice is at the top. The assessment, naturally, you can imagine, is going to fall within a community of practice. So we talked a little bit about the definition of communities of practice. We like to start around the process. So if you have a lessons learned process, or maybe you have a design review process, or you might have any process within your organization, the community of practice is where you manage how that process behaves. The assessment is the tool that actually facilitates the completion of the process or the activity within the process. So the community of practice is at the top. The assessment is going to fall underneath that community of practice in our information hierarchy. So our next item is going to be the project. So we have projects in Auros, and what Auros IQ uses those to do is it defines the context associated with the application of knowledge. So if we're going through an audit process, maybe you're auditing a manufacturing plant. You may be going through a design review, and that design review is associated with a vehicle program. We use Auros to manage our release process, and we have different release projects. So different versions of the software are an individual project where we're trying to complete a collection of software changes. So our release projects are examples of projects. We have a lot of customers in the automotive industry. They use vehicle program. Some use product codes. We also have organizations that will use partner locations. So that could be suppliers, it could be joint ventures. But the context of where maybe an audit is being done is a manufacturing location that's on site at a supplier. And then we also have groups that will use the customer, internal for us and in other sites as well. The customer can be the context for how you're applying the knowledge. So we have a lot of different things that will happen with our customers, and there's information associated with those customers that provide context, and that context is captured using the project. So the big part about the project in Auros is that it's going to play a key role when we're reporting, as well as it allows us to automate the process long term. So generally, when we have groups come on board initially, the project is context, but because we're implementing this new approach, we have new techniques. Maybe there are things that we don't quite know about the process or about the capability of the knowledge-aware approach. The project generally just sets that context. But as implementations start to mature, you start to understand a little bit more. We're capturing data in a normalized fashion. It allows us to learn, continuously improve. The project can be used in a lot of ways to deliver information into the assessment control. It can be used to assign the work in an automated fashion. There are a lot of things that our project can do long-term that allow us to take some of the manual work out of assigning assessments out to groups. So if we come back to our information hierarchy, we've got the community of practice at the top. The assessment falls within the community of practice. And this is one of the things that sometimes is a little bit difficult for people to follow or for people to kind of consume. The project is actually on the same level of the community of practice. So the community and the project are siblings. You're going to have multiple communities that will participate or have information applied within the context of a project. And then obviously you'll have a lot of different projects that may flow through multiple different processes or multiple different communities of practice. The assessment is what's going to be kind of that binding resource that brings those two together. So we need to facilitate or complete a process. We do that within the context of a project, and the assessment is where those two things come together. So the assessment is going to fall underneath the community and the project. So now if we go into our last term here, we've got knowledge packets. The knowledge packets, like Jeff said, are a fundamental aspect of what we do. In a lot of scenarios previously, the knowledge packets are kind of where our groups have started. They're intentionally the fourth item that's listed in this particular presentation. And that's because they're essential. We need the knowledge packets in order to apply them within the assessment under that context of a project. So they're structured, granular units of know-how. You can think of them as maybe a lesson learned. Best practices often are captured in knowledge packets. Audit questions can be turned into knowledge packets as well. And these knowledge packets are going to be purpose-built to efficiently capture, share, and reuse knowledge. So there are a lot of different features, knowledge models, different tagging mechanisms that we have that allow us to ensure that knowledge is being captured consistently in an efficient manner. That then allows us to share that knowledge across different assessments, potentially across communities. And then the reuse of it is going to be tracked in the assessment control, where we kind of establish this data footprint that can be learned from. So the knowledge packet is the central or the gold source of the knowledge, which as the data footprint is being established by the assessment control, the knowledge packet is collecting that in one central location so that we can start to learn from it, so it can help assist with problem solving and just give users a more efficient access point to all of the ways that knowledge has been applied over time. So if we go back to our information hierarchy diagram, we have the community of practice and the project kind of as siblings. The assessment is going to bring those two things together. The knowledge packet is going to be, it's going to participate in the assessment, so it'll be referenced by the assessment control, but it generally is aligned with the community of practice. So even though it gets evaluated using an assessment control in the context of a project, the knowledge packet is generally specific to the process, specific to the organizational unit, specific to the functional group or the product group, and then it gets delivered into the assessment and evaluated in the context of a project. So that is the overview of the fundamentals. I guess, are there any questions?
Thanks, Josh. So I apologize to those of you that are having some technical issues. We're trying to work through those. It was just a handful of you. So it's not everybody. So we're working on it. There's been some advice in the chat. If you can see it, it is best ran on Chrome, but I know a few of you have messaged me and said you tried Chrome and that's still not working. There could be, and this is extreme, there could be some kind of firewall on your company's end that's preventing this. We're looking into all those possibilities, so I completely apologize if anybody can't see or hear me. Obviously, if you can't hear me, this apology doesn't mean a lot. But bottom line is, if we will convey the information from you to you. The worst case scenario, we're recording it all, and we will send it to you after the conference is over. But hopefully, we'll be able to get it resolved pretty quickly here. Josh, we did have one question come in from Paula. Thank you, Paula. Can you automatically feed back the lessons learned into the next project KPAC or assessment?
Yeah, you can. The community of practice is going to allow us to make configurations that will facilitate that. So without getting into like all the specific details of how that's done, the community of practice kind of organizes the knowledge, how the assessments work, how they deliver knowledge packets into the next project. And then based on those configurations, everything moving forward, all the subsequent projects that happen, we can create those knowledge packets. The project sets context. If the knowledge packet that's been created meets the context that's been set, it'll be delivered into the assessment control, which really helps with the reduction of some of the challenges that we see when we have templates of knowledge. The knowledge packet kind of acts as that template, but there's no copying of templates. So we're not making a copy of like an Excel checklist, which is then disconnected from the Excel application, right? So those kinds of things are facilitated through the knowledge packet, and you can ensure that the updated lesson learned does participate in projects moving forward.
Thanks, Josh. Gavin, thank you for letting me know. So we've got another technical issue that's popped up. People can hear me, but some can't hear you, Josh. So that's not good either. So we've got the folks on our end working on the issues. Again, if you're not having any problems, I'm sorry to keep dwelling on the subject. We've got to obviously move on because the conference is live. If you're having issues, keep trying. If not, we'll get the information to you after the conference. Any other questions before we move on? Paula asked another one. Thank you so much, Paula. Appreciate the questions. Can I take my currently set up standardized work methods for a project, or do I have to reassess my current project process method?
If I'm understanding the question properly, the knowledge packet would kind of be the set of standardized work. And then the assessment would be where that standardized work gets assessed in the context of a project. So in Auros, the project is the context for how the standardized work gets applied, and the assessment is going to track that application. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Paul, but if it does not, feel free to reach out to myself or Jim, and we can maybe set up a call where we can have a live. Okay, right on, it does answer.
Right. Awesome. Thanks, Paul. I appreciate the questions. If there's any other questions, please keep them coming. While we wait on that, I'm going to put a link in the chat that I mentioned at the beginning, which is a survey link for this session. If you guys wouldn't mind taking a few minutes and filling it out, please, if you fill it out and say you couldn't hear or see anything either, that's fine too. All of this information is going to be collected and used for us to hopefully make the experience better moving forward. And we've got about 5 minutes left here, but we'll give you the time back if there's no more questions. Our next session starts at 2:15, which is beginner track session number 2 with me and Josh. And that one will all focus on knowledge modeling and the concept of knowledge aware.